Lisa told me to be playing that.
She did?
Okay, I'm gonna start one just for that. We'll wait 1 or 2 more minutes before we get started. All right, let's get started. So
This is going to be a little strange. I've done this type of workshop a few times. I'm very used to presenting in general, but never have I had to do it when I'm just talking to my computer and just hope somebody's on the other end, right? So I do have somebody, there is a volunteer monitoring for questions in the comments. This is, unfortunately, this is my very first time using Twitch. And so I'm unfamiliar with how to monitor for comments or even how to view the comments. I didn't know that YouTube channels had to be verified before they could go live, but it makes sense. So we were not able to get it on YouTube this time, but the next workshop, hopefully we will get it on YouTube. So, oh, there we go. I see the chat over there on the right-hand side. Sorry, first time on Twitch. So anyway, okay, so let's get started. My name is Ethan Gregory Dodge. I'm with a new organization called the Citizens Privacy Coalition of Santa Clara County, and this is Anti-Surveillance 101. We're just going to go through, oops, there we go. What is the Citizens Privacy Coalition? We're a grassroots volunteer-run watchdog coalition that aims to combat the lack of oversight and awareness surrounding the state of government and corporate surveillance in the heart of Silicon Valley. Essentially, we want there to be a lot more oversight and transparency into how law enforcement and corporate surveillance is functioning in Santa Clara County. There are some wonderful efforts going on in San Francisco and Oakland and other parts of the Bay Area, but not in the South Bay, at least not to the extent that there are in other parts. And so we're trying to get a lot of volunteers to help us out to do that. Part of our mission, we kind of have a threefold mission. One is to investigate. What we do is we try and investigate what's going on in how law enforcement is using different types of surveillance in Santa Clara County, and then use that information to help push our local lawmakers and legislate abusive surveillance practices, and then educate the public about those abusive surveillance practices, what they can do to help, and then also do workshops like this. We were very much inspired by the Black Lives Matter 2020 protests, and like a lot of other abusive law enforcement policy, surveillance disproportionately affects the communities of color, and that's why we wanted to help do our part. I'm a cybersecurity professional, and my passion for racial justice and privacy, this is where it intersects really nicely, and so I thought I'd kind of lift where I stand and help out. So right now in our mission of investigate and legislate, we are concentrating on facial recognition surveillance. The cities of San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, and Alameda have all banned the use of facial recognition surveillance by law enforcement. If you go to that URL, cpcssc.org/face, that's actually not going to take you anywhere, because but it will in the coming days. So apologies for that. But I'm currently developing resources for everybody to reference so that they're more educated about facial surveillance. Black individuals are up to 100 times more likely to be misidentified by facial recognition surveillance. And like I said, we're going to have an information session and a resource page on our website soon, and we're going to start working with the individual cities and the county itself to end facial recognition. We know for sure that the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department, they are using facial recognition in their efforts. We suspect that San Jose Police Department is as well as a lot of the other cities, but we're still investigating that to be 100% sure. The only department that we know 100% sure is using facial recognition is the Sheriff's Department. And then we educate, just like I said, through workshops like these. This is going to be really interesting. Like I said, usually these workshops go like anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, because I'm in front of people answering their questions and whatnot. And it's a lot of fun. please put your questions in the chat and I will do my best to answer them. Like I said, there's a volunteer tomorrow helping me out to get to your questions. In choosing the content for today, I tried to keep it as basic as we could, because there's kind of, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I plan on having another workshop is what I'm getting at, kind of like an anti-surveillance 102. And so if this workshop doesn't cover everything that you want, or that you were hoping, hopefully 102 will, and we will have these periodically and regularly. But this one is kind of a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can do right now to help protect yourself while you're organizing and protesting. And lastly, we need volunteers. Like I said, those are some pretty lofty goals that we have. I'm also a dad, and I have I have a day job as well. So I can't do this all by myself. In fact, if I don't get volunteers, I'm probably just not going to be able to do it at all. So if you're interested in volunteering, please fill out the form at our website, cpcsec.org/contact. That would be fantastic. So today's agenda, we're going to be focusing on one very specific thing, and that is encryption, encryption, encryption. Encryption is kind of a magical word, and a very misunderstood word. People often, oftentimes you hear the terms like military grade encryption or something like that. Military grade encryption is kind of a term that we laugh at in the security community, because the military uses the same encryption that we all use. It's kind of like, and it's kind of like a fantasy, like those YouTube videos where it takes a compilation of all like the spy videos and they're enhancing camera footage and they're like enhance, 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 and like that technology just doesn't exist. It's kind of the equivalent of that. But encryption, I hope that at the end of this, y'all will understand encryption quite a bit better, and understand how you can use it to protect yourself, and then also where encryption will fall short in protecting you. So we're going to go over, how do I encrypt my internet activities when you're browsing it online and whatnot? How do I encrypt my email? How do I encrypt text messages and phone calls? How do I encrypt my phone? And what should I do while protesting? And I know a lot of you are actively out there. I myself am out there fairly often. I'm usually in this Kaepernick jersey that I'm wearing right now and a man bun. So if you ever see me, feel free to come up and say hi. Yeah, we'll go over some tactics that you can do to help protect your data and help protect yourself. Again, a lot of this is going to be very basic stuff, things that you could do right now that are going to have a great impact on what you're doing on protecting yourself. Kind of like, if you're all familiar with the 80-20 rule, roughly 80% of surveillance can be avoided by taking 20% of precautions, right? And then the rest of the 80% of precautions are going to fill in the rest of the gap. This is, as I put there in parentheses, the statistic is just for illustration. It's not exact. I have no clue what it really would be, but you get the point. We're trying to get you the most protection with as little effort as possible, right? So that's my goal today. So what is encryption? It is the process of converting messages into ordinary language or other information into a secret coded form that cannot be interpreted without knowing the secret method for interpretation, called the key. Encryption is, we're going to watch this video in a second, but encryption has been used for centuries. Julius Caesar used encryption. He used that's what the most basic form of encryption is actually called the Caesar cipher. And what he did was he took the last 3 letters of the alphabet and then moved them to the front of the alphabet, and then put the normal alphabet above, and then did matching. So like in our alphabet, A would have been X, B would have been Y, and C would have been Z, and then and so on. D would have been A, blah, blah, blah. And then that's how he wrote his messages. And then, and that is an extremely simple form of encryption, right? Today we have, our computers have a ton of computing power that we can do much better encryption than that, right? But that is the basic idea. If you ever have seen the movie Imitation Game, now I'm second guessing myself if that's the name, but it's a movie about, oh God, I'm forgetting the name of the Alan Turing. I just read his biography recently too. Alan Turing, who actually was during World War II, he was a member. He helped the British Army crack the Enigma machine, which the Enigma machine was being used by the Nazis to encrypt their messages, and that is actually largely a huge reason why the Allies actually won World War II, was because they were able to decrypt Nazi communications without the Nazis knowing that they were able to. Which at the time, that was an incredible feat. And actually, Alan Turing, to do it, he essentially built the first processing unit, or at least a precursor to it. So essentially the first computer, which is pretty amazing. So I'm going to stop sharing really quick because I forgot to share sound when I shared this so that we could see this video. Give me 1 second. So encryption is often very mystified, very, it's confusing, right? Not everyone has the same understanding of it. And so I want to go through this video is from the Wall Street Journal, and it's specifically talking about encrypting your text messages and your communications that way. But try and remove try and think about it at a more high level, not just apply it to text messages, but see it applying to pretty much any form of communication, right? The principle is essentially the same. And I really hope you can hear this. If someone in the chat room, when I start playing, wants to indicate that you can hear it, I would greatly appreciate that.
Keeping your text messages protected from hackers and eavesdroppers has become a major issue. The government says it occasionally needs access to some of these messages to investigate criminals and terrorists. But tech companies see that as a potential violation of privacy. Your text messages are protected using what's called end-to-end encryption. This encryption happens whenever you send a secure text message from your smartphone. Here's how end-to-end encryption works to keep your data private while in transit. Your phone has 2 unique keys that encrypt and decrypt messages. These are called public and private keys. Your public key is shared with other people, and it's used as part of the encryption protocol. Your private key is only on your device and is never shared. When 2 people want to securely chat, they use a combination of public and private keys to create a temporary shared key. Let's look at how this works. Alice sends Bob a message which simultaneously causes an exchange of public keys. Both Bob and Alice use the other person's public key combined with their own private key to create a temporary shared key. They then use this shared key to encrypt messages to each other, and their public keys are used to confirm that those shared keys are authentic. The shared keys are being erased and regenerated constantly, which ensures that Bob and Alice's conversation cannot be decrypted in the future. An eavesdropper could see that Alice and Bob exchanged messages. But because the eavesdropper doesn't have Alice or Bob's shared key, these messages can't be decrypted. Some people believe that tech and telecom companies should provide what's called backdoor access to these encrypted messages. There are 2 types of backdoors. The first type is a list of private keys that would allow the company access to encrypted messages, so they could deliver these messages to an agency such as the FBI. There are 2 problems with this method. 1, if this list is hacked or compromised, every person's private key is up for grabs. 2, if this system is abused, you, the user, would have no idea that someone is accessing your data. The second type of backdoor is for tech companies to deliberately build a weakness or flaw into the encryption formula that would allow law enforcement to access the messages on a case-by-case basis. The problem with this method is that hackers might eventually find a way to exploit those weaknesses too. At the core of this whole debate is the very thorny issue of personal privacy versus national security. It's one that society, tech companies, and the government are still trying to decrypt.
Fantastic. So I hope that gave you a pretty good overview. So essentially, the idea is that with encryption, put very simply, you take a message, you scramble it, just like I was talking about with the Caesar cipher, and then you get it to somebody, and only that person, ideally only that person, would have the ability and the knowledge to be able to unscramble it, right, to what you originally meant to send it. That is what encryption is at a high level. With modern technology and the computing power that we currently have, typically we refer to those things that we refer to what uses the encryption as keys, right? And so as that said, each user has a public key, that is used to encrypt the message, right? And then each user also has a private key. So Bob encrypts Alice's message with Alice's public key, sends the message to Alice, and then Alice decrypts it with her private key. And they are called public and private keys for a very specific reason, right? Because the private key you do not want to share with anybody. You do not want anybody to have access to it. Otherwise, they can read messages that are only intended for you. Does that make sense? I'm used to asking that question, but I realize that y'all probably aren't going to answer me right away because there's about a 20-second lag between what I'm actually saying and what you're hearing. So if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt in the chat room, and I'll try my best to answer them. So yeah, that's encryption. And there's a difference between that. Specifically talked about end-to-end encryption. I want to kind of deep dive into the difference between just encryption and end-to-end encryption. End-to-end encryption, as that video pointed out, is the idea that the message can only be decrypted by the person who it was intended to be for, or the device, right? So my phone has a public key, your phone has a public key, and they both also have private keys. You encrypt the message, send it to the phone decrypts it, and it can only be decrypted on that phone, right? Or any other device that you might delegate or designate to be able to receive and decrypt those messages. Now, that is different from other types of encryption. For example, if we think about the internet, you browse to a website, and we're gonna get to this for in a minute, but we're going to get to how this works in a minute. Your data is encrypted. Your data is encrypted, and then sorry, got distracted for 1 second here. So let's say you browse to google.com, right? And then you type something into the search bar at google.com. The data that you send to Google is now, it is encrypted while it goes through different, for instance, so it leaves your house, goes through your ISP's infrastructure or over their internet cables, right? But it is encrypted and only Google can get to it. However, Google is storing that information on their servers, right? And they're storing your search history so that they could then in turn turn that over to law enforcement if the law enforcement got a proper subpoena, or sometimes if they got a shady subpoena, as we know that sometimes happens as well. Or for example, let's say you send an email and you're using Gmail. Let's say you're sending it from Gmail to Yahoo. The content of that email may be encrypted between Gmail and Yahoo, and nobody in between can see it. However, it is then decrypted on Gmail and Yahoo servers, and they can see it, and then it is then re-encrypted back down to your internet browser, right? That is not end-to-end encryption because Google and Yahoo can get at it, and before it gets to you, right? The ideal, when you really want to protect your communications, is total end-to-end encryption, so that only you and the person that you intend the message to get to can receive the data, can receive the message, right? That is end-to-end encryption. And we're going to go over why all that is important and how to implement those things here throughout the thing. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. encryption is not bulletproof. It will not protect you from data you submit to a website or reveal to a third party. For example, like the Google search that I just gave was a really good example. Got a little bit ahead of myself there, but let's say you go to Google and you Google Black Lives Matter, San Jose, California, right? Then the form, that the data that search string, that search sentence that you just submitted to Google is encrypted, and your internet provider can't necessarily see that you're logged into Google or that you aren't logged into Google, or exactly depending on how Google handles it. Actually, in Google's specific case, your internet service provider can see exactly what you're searching for. But the point is Google can then tie that search, Black Lives Matter, San Jose, California, to your user if you're logged in, or to your IP address if you're not logged in, or which your IP address is think of it as your telephone number. It's probably a really good way to put it, right? When you call somebody, they can see the telephone number that it's coming from. Same thing when you hit a website or any server on the internet, they can see the IP address that it's coming from, and that IP address is tied to you. Especially if it's coming from your house. If you're like at a coffee shop or something like that, it might be a little bit more difficult, but still not impossible to connect to you. So remember that. We're going to go through ways that you can protect yourself through that. Oh, I just realized I didn't put in a slide here. In this, there was so much information that I wanted to put in that I forgot. But that I would not, on that note of using Google, I would not suggest using Google to search. And we'll touch on this in the next one, because the next one is going to be all about protecting yourself from corporate surveillance and like companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon from tracking you online and whatnot. One of the most effective things that you could do against that is to actually use the browser called DuckDuckGo. Because they do not track your searches, they don't tie them to you at all, and they've still found a way to monetize and make money. Who'd have thought, right? So anyway, don't use Google. I highly suggest DuckDuckGo. All right, so let's get into the first question that I posed. How do I encrypt my internet activities? We're gonna watch this video here, and it's going to be it's going to kind of go into what I was saying earlier, and it maybe will hopefully illustrate it a little bit better for y'all.
It used to be that if the government or anyone else wanted to spy on you and find out what you were thinking, they'd have to put in a bit of work. To really track everything, governments needed a real human spy to watch you. That meant that spying was a labor-intensive job. In heavily surveilled countries like East Germany, where the government wanted to keep an eye on everyone, 2 out of every 13 East Germans ended up being used by the Stasi as an informant. These days, it's a lot easier and takes fewer people to spy on one person, or spy on everyone for that matter. For that advance in mass surveillance, you can thank modern technology. You're probably still safe from surveillance if you're just writing or thinking or talking on your own in your own house. But the moment you use the internet to save, edit, or share something, things get a lot simpler for the 21st century spy. You might have heard that sending an email across the internet is like sending a postcard. Unlike a sealed envelope, your message might be seen by a few people on the way. In fact, the majority of traffic on the internet, emails, phone calls, photos, video, instant messages, is viewable by anyone who has access to the computers that your message passes through, from the computer in your home, to your local ISP, to the final destination of your message, and all points between. And on the internet, there are a lot of points in between. Whenever you visit a website or save a document or send a message online, your data goes through at least a handful of computers and probably many more. These computers aren't owned by you or the final recipient of the message, but their operators or someone who hacks into them can look at and record everything about your message, including where it came from and where it's meant to be going. Some of these computers direct traffic for thousands or millions of people. So if you can put the digital equivalent of a spy camera in those computers, you could quickly collect the private thoughts of an entire population. There's a way, however, to make your communications private even as they travel across the public internet, and that's by using strong encryption. Encrypted messages are turned into a form that is unreadable except to the person at their destination. Since the Ed Snowden revelations, more and more websites and internet companies have been using encryption to protect data in transit, but it's still not the default for many internet services. To increase your own use of encryption and to protect your data, you can use HTTPS Everywhere, a browser plugin from the Electronic Frontier Foundation that tells websites you visit to use encryption when they can. The more people use encryption, the more expensive it is to monitor everyone, which means that spies will have to go back to targeted, tailored surveillance instead of trying to be a cheaper version of East Germany Stasi, spying on everyone. If you'd like to know more about using encryption and HTTPS Everywhere, check out Surveillance Self-Defense from the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
All right, cool. So I hope y'all saw that URL there at the end, actually, the ssd.eff.org. That's actually where I'm largely taking most of this curriculum from. SSD stands for Surveillance Self-Defense. And the EFF stands for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and they are a nonprofit based in San Francisco that has done a lot of great work defending our online freedoms, but also in curbing and fighting surveillance. In fact, maybe one of these times where I also hope to have a monthly meetup where we don't just do workshops, but we kind of just learn about surveillance and the history of it and just technology and whatnot. And maybe one of the first ones we'll do is just a deep dive into the history of surveillance, but specifically what the US government has tried to do to break encryption. The first video that we watched kind of talked about that a little bit, and the EFF was instrumental in the 90s in curbing the US government's abuse in trying to break encryption. So definitely check out that story, follow the EFF, support the EFF if you can. We actually applied, the Citizens Privacy Coalition applied to be a chapter, or they call them an ally of the EFF in their Electronic Frontier Alliance. So let's dive a little bit into that video. What is HTTPS? It stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, or security. Originally the internet, sorry, let me take one step back. Hypertext Transfer Protocol is the protocol that is used in your internet browser to actually display the web pages that you are viewing. If you look at in your browser, actually we'll go right here. In that second one, you will see HTTP://, right? Well, in this one, it's HTTPS. The S is a big difference, and I've highlighted the locks here. The top one is from Google Chrome, and the bottom one is from Mozilla Firefox. If you don't see the lock, then that site is not using HTTPS. Mozilla Firefox still actually puts the HTTPS protocol in front of the URL, and that's fine. But the easiest way is to look for the lock. And actually, Google Chrome plans on in the future to actually block sites that aren't using HTTPS, which is actually a fantastic move that I applaud. It's extreme. That video is a couple years old, and it's actually very rare to find a website. I don't want to say very rare, but it's becoming much harder to find a website that doesn't use HTTPS. And essentially what HTTPS is doing is it is encrypting the traffic from your computer to Google servers, to DuckDuckGo servers, to any website that you're going to. It is encrypting that traffic so that any data that you're sending to that, your ISP and any other network in between, can't spy on it. But remember what I said earlier, whatever server that you are actually navigating to can see what's going on and see the data that you're submitting, and they likely store it on their servers for a period of time as well. And that gets me to metadata. Metadata is data about data, and HTTPS does not hide metadata. Now, what am I talking about when I say metadata? The destination. HTTPS does not hide where you are going, and that's actually why I said earlier that your ISP and other networks in between can actually see what you are what you are searching for, and that is because Google stores what you're searching for in the destination URL in that bar. When you go and look for, go back to our last example, Black Lives Matter San Jose, California. If you search that and then you look in the URL bar, you will actually see the words. They'll be all jumbled because they're URL encoded, but you will see the words with some jumble between Black Lives Matter San Jose, California, right? And so. So the web page that you're actually browsing to, that is not protected by HTTPS, nor is your source, your IP address, where you're coming from. That can also be seen when you're using HTTPS. The browser that you're using, you can do some things to get around that, but that might break some websites and whatnot. And maybe we'll go over that in either 102 or 103. Who knows? We'll see. But that's also a piece of metadata that HTTPS does not hide. The time that you made the request at, like stuff like that. The only thing that, HTTPS does not hide your browsing history on your computer, right? I just want to make that very clear. It may seem a little silly that I'm pointing this out, but it's extremely important to understand that your browser is actually saving your browsing history and all the pages that you've ever seen, right? And HTTPS does not protect against that. If you're concerned about that, clear your browsing history regularly or configure it not to be saved. Usually I usually have a couple different browsers, and one of them I have configured to never save my history, and then one to always save my history, or if you go into an incognito tab or window in Chrome, or a private window is what Firefox calls it, they won't save your history. But what HTTPS does hide is the data that you're sending to a website, such as an email, right? When you type up an email into Google or Yahoo or whatever you're using, and then you hit send, that data is being sent over HTTPS to Gmail servers, and then they are then using the email protocol to send it to wherever it needs to go, right? Or say you're logging into your banking website, right? Your username and password are protected from HTTPS. In fact, you never ever want to enter a password on a site that is not using HTTPS, right? But keep in mind that the destination that it's going to, for instance, your bank is going to see your username and password, which makes sense because they need to be able to see it in order to successfully log you in, right? So at the end of that video suggested installing a plugin called HTTPS Everywhere. You could go to EFF.org/HTTPS-everywhere to install it. And what that does is like I said, some sites, whether or not a site uses HTTPS is entirely up to the person who's administering the site. And they may or may not use it. Like I said, the number of sites that are using it are way more than it was just 2 years ago, 1 or 2 years ago. And eventually Chrome is going to start blocking sites that don't use it. So this plugin may be rendered obsolete in the next year or two, but that's okay. I would suggest using it for now. And what this does is it simply checks to see if you accidentally navigate to a version of a site that is not using HTTPS, but that site does offer HTTPS, it will upgrade the connection to a secured connection immediately, right? So that's the advantage of using that. Highly recommend it. I highly recommend any plugin that comes from the EFF because they definitely have your best interests in mind when it comes to privacy. Let's talk about Tor browser. So the Tor browser is another way that is kind of, I put next level here. It makes it sound like I'm a gamer, but I'm not a gamer. And those that are gamers probably are like, yeah, we knew that. But anyway, Tor, whoops, I clicked out of my window here. Tor is a hidden network inside the internet, and it is only accessible through the Tor browser or by using another means to successfully connect to it. And because it is the way it is designed, third parties cannot know where the request came from. It was originally developed by a man named Roger Dingledine, and I've met Roger personally. He's a great guy, and he was very concerned about the growing threat of surveillance on people in the world. Not just the United States, and he And he develops Tor, and Tor is now a full-blown nonprofit. It's called the Tor Project. You can go to the torproject.org. And when you hear about the dark web or the deep web and these secret sites that are on the internet, they're usually being hosted on the Tor network and are only accessible via the Tor network, right? But the nice thing about Tor is that your data is totally encrypted, and it does hide that metadata that I was talking about, because it essentially, to put it at a very high level and not to get too technical here, Tor routes your traffic through a bunch of different proxies, a bunch of different relay points. And then those relay points, all it says to the server that is routing it to the next relay point is where the last server that it came from was, not where you were, not what your IP address was, right? So it's extremely difficult to be tied back to you, near impossible. And the reason why I say near impossible is because there have been a couple times where people weren't using Tor correctly, and it was tied back to them. But I highly recommend using Tor if you're you can download the Tor browser at torproject.org. You sacrifice a little bit of speed, but if you really don't want to risk your activity being seen, it's well worth it. And in fact, Tor gets faster with time. And the more people that are actually hosting Tor proxies, the faster it will get. So anyway, I use Tor fairly often, not because I'm like looking at bad things or anything like that, but because I don't want my ISP to be looking at what I'm searching and whatnot. And then the Tor browser does not save your history, right? So you don't have to worry about that. When you close it and then open it back up, it's like it's brand new. Nothing. It's like it's never happened. It destroys all the data from before, right? It's also available for iOS. Well, I don't have an iPhone. I don't know if there's an official Tor browser app for iOS, but I know there are other Tor browser apps that will connect you to the Tor network. For Android, I know for a fact because I use it all the time, there's a Tor browser app that you can use. So cool. Let's see. Thank you, Tamara, for putting those into the chat there. All right, so how do I encrypt my email? This is, I love the history of email encryption, and I love where it's going, because for any of you who aren't familiar with the Edward Snowden docs and the Edward Snowden leaks, I mean, that really was the catalyst to push for better and easier and more user-friendly email encryption. Because the NSA was gobbling up all of our emails and reading them, right? Perhaps not actively reading them, but they definitely are storing them. In fact, I grew up just down the highway from their huge data center in Utah, where they are storing most of our data. And they're building another one, I believe, in Kansas. Don't quote me if that's exactly where it is, but somewhere in that area, Kansas, Missouri area. So anyway, how do I encrypt my email? By far, the easiest way to do it is the service called Proton Mail. And Proton Mail is just at protonmail.com. It's a Swiss email provider that encrypts your inbox to the point that they can't even read it. Now, you sacrifice some usability when you do that. For instance, I use Proton Mail full time for all my email. I've been doing that for close to 4 years now. And it's one thing that I do miss when I migrated from Gmail to Proton Mail is I can't search on the content of the email anymore, right? So if I knew that there was this one phrase in an email, I can't search for that one phrase. But I can search for the subject or the person who sent it. And that's just the way, because it's encrypted, it is literally unsearchable by Proton Mail servers. However, they can search on that metadata, right? When that metadata, I'll go into this a little bit deeper later, is the sender and the destination, the user that it's intended for, the subject, stuff like that. So all emails sent so there's a little cache between Proton Mail that is often confused, right? All emails sent between Proton Mail addresses cannot be accessed by anyone other than who they are intended for. So if I have a Proton Mail email address and and I'm sending to another Proton email address, that will be totally encrypted. No one will be able to snoop on it. Proton Mail themselves will be able to see the metadata, but that's it, right? However, if like I said, metadata cannot be encrypted, source, destination, time, subject. An email sent from Proton Mail to any non-Proton Mail address or vice versa will be viewable by the other email provider, right? So if I send something from my Proton Mail email address to Gmail, that is encrypted in transit, but via HTTPS and other protocols. But like we said earlier, Google that email will be sitting on Google servers totally decrypted, right? And that's not ideal. However, what Proton Mail is super nice for is say, excuse me, say you are using it. Like I said, I use it full time. It's great. I love it. And then that way, if I just happen to be emailing anybody from using Proton Mail, then I can't, then I get that benefit of encryption. Another benefit that I get from it too is that Google isn't scanning my inbox all the time, right? And that's something that we could go into in the 102, because they actively scan your inbox to personalize ads. They say that they've stopped that, and there's been nothing to say that they haven't stopped that. But you know that it's very the data's there, right? And it can be used, and like I said too, that can then be subpoenaed by law enforcement. Whereas if your Proton Mail inbox was subpoenaed by law enforcement, Proton Mail would comply, but they would just give law enforcement just a big glob of data that they can't do anything with because it's encrypted and they don't have the keys to decrypt it, right? So yeah, so what I was saying was that Proton Mail is really good if you're planning, let's say you're planning a protest that is particularly sensitive, or you're working with a journalist or something like that, and you're acting as a source or something. Proton Mail is fantastic to get those communications back and forth, right? Or if you're running a nonprofit that has sensitive information and whatnot, Proton Mail is great. So anyway, that's by far the easiest way to encrypt your email is Proton Mail. And by the way, Proton Mail did not pay me to say all those great things. I'm just a big fan. Before Proton Mail, and there are a couple other, for instance, let me step back here. Edward Snowden used a service called LavaBit, which actually proved its salt, because when the NSA found out that LavaBit was hosting, had Edward Snowden's emails, LavaBit actually shut down completely, 100%, right? And I have never used LavaBit. I've heard good things about it. I've never used it, but we do know that in the past they have been good, because when the NSA subpoenaed Edward Snowden's emails, they didn't give them to him, right? So, but I can't speak a whole lot more than that. Before sites like Proton Mail and LavaBit, there was this thing called PGP. It definitely still exists. In fact, it's used extremely heavily in parts of the internet. And it stands for Pretty Good Privacy. And it's an encryption algorithm developed explicitly for email. Like I said, it's used for a lot of other things now. It has a steep learning curve with dozens of ways to implement it. And that's why I'm not going to go into the details of how to do it. However, the easiest way to do it specifically for Gmail, and I do think it exists for Yahoo and a couple other ones, and they're working on others, is to use a browser plugin called FlowCrypt. And you can go to flowcrypt.com. And if you're interested in continuing to use your email address and insisting that you use PGP, using FlowCrypt, I'd be more than happy to help you set that up in a way that isn't going to be compromising to your privacy and whatnot. But I highly recommend using Proton Mail for sensitive communications with another Proton Mail user, just because it's so sensitive. Proton Mail does also support PGP. With PGP, you have to have the other person's public key, like we talked about at the beginning, to be able to encrypt it. And so before you get before you send an email, you have to make sure you have the correct public key for that person so that they can then decrypt it. and I'm happy to walk you through all that. But we're not going to go into detail today, just because, like I said, the easiest way is Proton Mail by far. All right, this is my favorite one. How do I encrypt my text messages and phone calls? So text messages and phone calls are like, I just went on this whole rant about how the internet's getting so much better and whatnot, and how, I mean, 5-6 years ago, like a minority of websites were using HTTPS, and then also, 5, 6, 7 years ago, your email was not encrypted when it was being sent over, and so anyone can watch it and read it and whatnot. But now that's been fixed, and major email providers have started encrypting it across the wire and stuff like that. None of that has happened for text messages. Your cell phone providers do not care, right? They haven't shown, because it's so essential, and there are ways to get around it, and that's what I'm going to go through right now. But the thing is, a regular SMS text message is not encrypted. And it is very easily intercepted. In fact, there is software that I could run on my phone, like my Android phone, to intercept your text messages, right? Super easy. Law enforcement is likely doing it if they get a legal wiretap, obviously, but, or a legal wiretap warrant. Anyway, in fact, Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department submitted a proposal to buy a Stingray, and a Stingray is a device to intercept phone calls and text messages. Essentially, it's a fake cell phone tower, right? It tricks your phone into thinking it's a legitimate cell tower, and then it really routes everything to a legitimate cell tower while intercepting all of your communications, right? Excuse me. So I'm still investigating on whether or not they actually got that Stingray, and if it is being employed in the field or not. I will keep you updated from what I find out. But we know that they submitted that proposal, and so it's definitely something that they're interested in. So Signal Messenger, again, I'm going to rave about them, and I promise they didn't give me any money or endorse me in any way, but it is by far the absolute best and easiest option that you have to encrypt both your text messages and your phone calls. You go to signal.org to learn more about it. And the reason why they use end-to-end encryption. That's what E2E stands for. The end-to-end encryption that, like Proton Mail, Signal servers can't even read your text messages. And they've also implemented protocols that makes it so they can't even read your metadata, right? So they don't even know who you're talking to, when you're talking to them, and stuff like that. It's absolutely incredible, and they are always doing better work to improve themselves, to improve their product. They're a nonprofit, and they actually, the founder of WhatsApp, we're going to get into WhatsApp here in a second, who's no longer with WhatsApp, actually gave them, I think, $40 million to continue doing what they're doing, because it's absolutely incredible. And it is absolutely vital that as an organizer, as a protester, your communications and your text messages are going over Signal. One thing to be aware of, though, when you send a text message over Signal, it is using your data or your Wi-Fi. It is using whatever data connection you have. It's minimal on your data. And then when you make a phone call, it is also using your data connection, either your Wi-Fi or your cellular data. So that's just one thing to be aware of. However, I found in my experience that it's minimal, but I know some people have a lot lower data plans, right? And so, but if you're connected to Wi-Fi, then you're good. So, but anyway, if you just search Signal Messenger in the Play Store or the iOS App Store, it is super easy to set up. Like they walk you through all the steps, super simple, and then you're texting people, totally encrypted, and there you go, right? Highly recommend. I already said that. If they don't know, then they can't get. Oh yeah, that's another thing too. Oh, this is a great. So Australia recently passed a law that essentially said that that data providers and people that are collecting data on Australian citizens or Australian residents have to be able to decrypt decrypt Australian residents' communications with a valid law enforcement subpoena. Essentially building a hole and a backdoor into encryption like the first video suggested. Signal, the day after that law passed in Australia, came out with a blog post and said, we literally can't do that. Like they've been able to, like, good luck, we can't do that with ours. Like it would ruin everything that we've built. Anyway, so super fascinating. It's going to be very interesting because Australia is actually part of what's called the Five Eyes. That Five Eyes are the USA, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand. And what that is an intelligence partnership in which those countries actively share intelligence that they gather on various topics and whatnot. And so it's interesting that a major Five Eyes country has a law like that. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the future around that. All right, WhatsApp. It is better than nothing, but it's not ideal, right? If that's the only thing you got, if that's the easiest thing for you to do, it's definitely better than nothing, but it's not ideal, and we're going to go into why. It encrypts your content using the exact same algorithm as Signal. In fact, the folks from Signal worked with the WhatsApp engineers to implement their same encryption algorithm into WhatsApp. But Facebook owns WhatsApp, and they are actively analyzing the metadata. They are actively analyzing who you're talking to, and when you sign up for Facebook, they want to know your phone number, right? I haven't signed up for Facebook recently, so I don't know if they make you give a phone number or if you could still opt out of it. There was a big controversy when Facebook was actively matching your WhatsApp phone number that you gave WhatsApp to your Facebook profile without you knowing, and that was not great. Anyway, suffice it to say that Facebook has a lot of phone numbers, and they are actively looking at who you're talking to through WhatsApp. They can't see what you're saying or anything like that, but they can see who you're talking to, when you're talking to them, how often you're talking to them, and they use that data. Whether or not they use that data for malicious purposes is another story, but they definitely use it to for their algorithms and probably to target ads to you. And then also that's just, if Facebook has that data, if Facebook, Google, Amazon, any of these data companies, any of these tech companies, if they have that data, then potentially law enforcement can get that data, right? And the reason why, and I want to make it clear, the reason why I keep stressing that law enforcement can get this data, I mean, I think it's fairly, if I know my audience well enough, I'm sure you all understand why that's important, but there is a long history in this country of law enforcement abusing their powers, especially against people of color while they're protesting for their civil rights, right? Dr. Martin Luther King was surveilled, Malcolm X was surveilled, Frank Sinatra was surveilled, right? Like, because they thought that he was part of the Italian mafia. And I mean, the list is endless. We'll get into this a little bit later towards the last, towards the end of the presentation, but there have already been stories that are broken of law enforcement actively tracking the Black Lives Matter protests since George Floyd was killed, right? So it is actively still happening, right? And so, like I said, any data that a tech company has, law enforcement could get their hands on it. They need a subpoena, right? But some judges are a little more trigger happy with subpoenas than others. Keybase is another one. If you go to keybase.io, I believe is what it is. And I used to be a really big fan of Keybase, and I still am. However, they were just acquired by Zoom, and I'll point out the irony of me saying this because there's a big Zoom logo in the bottom right-hand corner of this webinar. Zoom bought them, and Zoom recently, I don't know if y'all saw this, but they censored Chinese activists' accounts, shutting them down completely at the request of the Chinese government. I mean, if I were a Keybase employee, I'd be pretty scared right now because that goes against everything that Keybase was founded for, right? Keybase is totally end-to-end encrypted. One cool thing that that I didn't mention about Signal, that Signal does this, WhatsApp does not, Keybase does. And what it is you can have timed messages. So like a message disappears after 5 minutes after the person reads it, or a day or a week. And what's really nice about that is if like, say you're sued, right? Or arrested or something like that. And you go through the discovery process and they're going through your data. If they can unlock your phone has the key to decrypt all of your messages in Signal. But if you have set them to disappear after a certain period of time, then they're not there and you can't do anything. Law enforcement can't do anything about it, right? So that's an important feature, and Keybase has that feature. One thing that I also really like about Keybase too is that it's got like a Slack or a Discord type feel, right? Where you can set up like a team of people and then have different chat rooms for all of them based on different topics and stuff. You can have groups in Signal, but it functions much more like a group text message than it does kind of like a Discord or a chat, or a Slack app. So, but like I said, I'm very weary of Keybase right now, only because they were acquired by Zoom and I don't trust Zoom. So I would give them my endorsement, but I just can't do that anymore. Telegram, I do not recommend Telegram at all. Their encryption has been proven to be less than ideal. It's better than nothing, I will say that, but there are so many other good options. I don't like, there's really not a great reason to go with Telegram unless you absolutely have to. All right, let's see, how are we doing on time? Okay, we've been going for about an hour. We got 5 people still here, so thank you. I'll be uploading this to YouTube so that you can reference it later, and for posterity reasons, right? So I appreciate you sticking this out with me. Now this may be one of the most important topics that we're going to cover. What should you do while protesting? And before I go here, I actually have a slide towards the end. I just realized I probably should have put it right now. A lot of what I'm going to say may sound like legal advice, but it is not legal advice. I am not an attorney. I have no formal legal training. So don't take it as such. But as somebody who does stay up to date on these type of issues, I'm one, passionate about them, and two, know about the current events on what's going on with these types of things, right? So what should you do while you're protesting? Well, one, you should implement all of those things that we just went over, right? Be it get Proton, make sure all your communications are encrypted leading up, right? Oh, sorry, let me backtrack. I keep backtracking quite a bit. I know a lot of the local activism is being organized on Discord right now, and Discord is great. It's super efficient, and it helps you stay organized and whatnot. I really like Discord from a user perspective. From a privacy perspective, it is terrible, because let's say you're planning a really sensitive operation or protest. For instance, let's talk about the Montgomery bus riots back in the civil rights era. Had they had Discord, if those were being planned, right, that is a very good example of something that you would not want to plan on Discord, right? Because a lot of people got arrested, a lot of people got hurt, and you would not want to have that evidence of what was planned and what was said by who being able to be subpoenaed by law enforcement, right? So I highly encourage planning sensitive operations using an encrypted messaging app. All right. So what you should do while protesting, make sure that you've been doing all of your communications, all the sensitive communications on all of these channels that I just talked about. One thing you need to be aware of is your location. Your location is being tracked in several different ways through your cell phone. There have been a couple different articles that have recently come out. This is a headline from Vox, says law enforcement is now buying cell phone location data from marketers. There's no longer a matter of creepy ads. This is no longer a matter of creepy ads following you around the internet. Very recently, there was actually an instance where ICE bought a database of cell phone location data and analyzed it. And they were actually able to determine, they found a tunnel of immigrants coming from Mexico and coming up out of a tunnel into Arizona, just by looking at aggregated cell phone data that they were able to get from a third-party private company, which is really scary if you think about it. And the tunnel came up in the middle from the basement of a KFC restaurant, and the owner of that KFC restaurant, I believe, was arrested. And I'm actually not entirely sure what happened to those people that were crossing the border that way. But yeah, this is the thing. Most recently, almost 17,000 protesters had no idea a tech company was tracing their location. This is from BuzzFeed. Data company Mobile used cell phone information to estimate the demographics of protesters. Senator Elizabeth Warren says it's shady and concerning. This happened, right? I'm blanking on the city. I want to say it was Chicago, but I could be wrong on the city that it exactly happened in. But this company got their hands they bought this data, right? And they were able to glean different information, but from the neighborhoods that these people were coming from, right? So they could see that these people were coming from the protests from this neighborhood, that these people were coming from the protests from this neighborhood, and because of the racial disparities that we have in this country and things like redlining and whatnot, and they were able to know that people coming from this neighborhood are much more likely to be African American, and people from this neighborhood are much more likely to be white, and people from this neighborhood much more likely to be Latinx and stuff like that, right? And so they were actually able to glean some fairly accurate statistics on the demographics of these Black Lives Matter protesters, and this was just days after George Floyd was killed and the protests really erupted nationwide. So this is something that is actively happening. If a private company can buy this information, law enforcement can also buy this information. So the way that this works is your cellular provider can triangulate your general location, not your exact location, but your general location based on what tower your phone is using at any given time, right? So there's cell towers wherever you're going, well, almost wherever you're going. If you're out in the boonies, maybe not. But anyway, so you cross over into one neighborhood and you're going to start using the cell tower in that neighborhood. You cross over into another neighborhood, you're going to start using the cell tower in that neighborhood, and your cellular phone provider can know generally where you are and trace where you're going, right? So that is one way that your location can be tracked. GPS data, I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, that when you install a new app and it wants to know where it wants access to your location data. I generally don't grant that unless I specifically want, the feature that app gives me. One thing that's very important to note too is that privacy is an extremely personal thing, and some users will decide that they want to give certain companies certain data, and that's totally fine as long as they are making the educated and conscious decision to do that, right? So, but again, like I said, if Google or somebody else has that data, law enforcement can potentially get that data. And one thing that I've also talked, that I haven't touched on either too is other governments might be able to get their hands on it, or malicious actors, right? For instance, the Office of Personnel Management of the United States government was hacked by what is suspected to be the Chinese government, right? And the Office of Personnel Management has all employment data for any federal employee that has ever worked for the United States. Some of them have some employees have varying levels of data on them. Some have extremely different profiles on them and whatnot. But think of that's data that the Chinese government definitely wants. And they were able to successfully hack the Office of Personnel Management and steal that data, right? And and it's just not the Chinese government, the Russian government, and our government, the United States government. We do this all the time to private institutions and other, and here in the United States, as the Edward Snowden files reveal, we do what we can to get data from other people. And when I say we, I'm talking about the United States government and nation states all over the world do this, right? So I happen to know for a fact that Google protects their location data very well, and they because they've been fined a lot of money for not doing so in the past. However, I mean, nothing's bulletproof, right? So anyway, just there's a lot of people that can get their hands on this data if somebody has it. So choose carefully who you give it to. Protect your location while protesting. You can, if you want to, you can just leave it at home, right? And if you feel like you don't need it, if you're going to go to the protest, do the march, come back, or whatever, that might be a good option. Or if you can't, definitely suggest putting it into airplane mode. Airplane mode will block both your GPS from being on and cell phone towers from getting your location, right? So put it in airplane mode. Download offline maps and know your meeting spots ahead of time. And then also consider walking. And the reason why I say consider walking or riding your bike is not because of security cameras or anything like that, but because automatic license plate readers are deployed all over Santa Clara County. In fact, I believe, I can't remember which city, but I know that one city proposed that license plate readers be put on the back of garbage trucks, which essentially would make it so that anytime your garbage was picked up, they could then see who was parked at your house, right? Or if you were parked at somebody else's house, and then they could then associate you with that person, right? And so if you're driving to a protest and almost all cop cars have, or if not almost all cop cars do have a license plate reader. And if they're patrolling the area of the protest and they see your car in the vicinity and you don't want them to know that you're there, that's why I say consider walking, right? This is very important to protect your data on your phone while you're protesting. Temporarily disable face and fingerprint on your phone, right? You can either go into settings and just disable it so that every single time you unlock your phone, you have to do a passcode. Or both Android and iOS have the ability to do it just one time. On iOS, again, I don't have an iPhone, but I looked this up before. If you hold down the power button or the wake button, I guess, and one of the volume buttons, it'll give you the option to disable it. And so the next time you go to unlock your phone, you have to enter your password or your passcode. On Android, if you hold down the power button, then it will give you an options screen, and one of them is like screen lock, and the icon is a lock, and it will do the same thing. It'll require you to enter your passcode, and it will temporarily disable face and fingerprint ID to unlock your phone. The reason that you want to do this is because if you get arrested or detained, it's much easier for the police to compel you to use your face or your fingerprint to unlock your phone than it is for your passcode. If you take videos or photos, do so without unlocking your phone. I know that Android, again, I haven't used iOS in a long time, but I'm sure that it has a feature where you can take a video or a photo without unlocking your phone. That would be ideal. Obviously, I know, like, for instance, I know there on the 4th of July, I know there was an art get together where they were at Vaquesto Park and they painted a mural on the street. And I know there was a lot of dancing and a lot of people having fun, right? Like in those situations, and they were live streaming on Instagram, and that's a lot of fun and whatnot. And sometimes live streaming does serve a purpose. And if that's the case, then just use your best judgment when taking your phone out of airplane mode to be able to live stream that stuff, right? But if you're particularly worried, try to take videos and photos without unlocking your phone. If you get arrested, you can refuse to unlock your phone. But it is much easier for you to do so if you have face and fingerprint ID disabled, right? If you don't have Face ID disabled, then all the police officer needs to do is hold up the phone to your face, and he's in, and they're in, right? If you don't have fingerprint ID disabled, then I mean, what's to say? I mean, we would like to think. Well, no. I mean, we know that cops are not ethical, and it's not unheard of for a cop to lift your fingerprint and use it to unlock your phone, right? There is actually very, very interesting case law on this, and it is actually colliding because two different state Supreme Courts, one in Indiana and one in another state, I can't remember, have ruled. One ruled that the police cannot compel you to give up your passcode to your phone. And the other one ruled that the police can compel you to do that, and it all circulates around the Fifth Amendment that you can't incriminate yourself, right? You can't be forced to incriminate yourself, and it's around this idea is if you give the police your passcode, are you incriminating yourself or not, right? And one court ruled yes, and one court ruled no, and so this will likely be heard in the United States Supreme Court sooner or later because of the conflicting case law across the country so far. But for now, and again, I'm not an attorney, but the rule of thumb is that you can refuse to unlock your phone using your passcode, right? So that is why it's very important to disable Face and fingerprint ID. Again, there's a disclaimer, I'm not an attorney and this does not constitute legal advice. So thank you so much. This was, like I said, this was super strange because I am much more used to engaging with the audience and answering their questions. If you have questions, feel free to DM us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or I know this is a privacy thing, so you could also email us at contact@cpcscc.org. If you want to email me directly, I use Proton Mail, and you could email me at e@egd.io, as in my initials, Ethan Gregory Dodge. And I'd be more than happy to help anyone. We're going to do the next workshop, Anti-Surveillance 102, where we're going to do an overview of how to protect yourself from those corporate eyes of tracking your browsing activity, and also locking down your accounts using strong passwords, stuff like that. We're going to be doing that sometime in August. I have to figure out my calendar. So anyway, thanks so much, everyone. And be sure to follow us on social media and keep your eyes out for, like I said, we should have some resources coming out about facial recognition pretty soon. Thanks for your support. Let me end this meeting. Thanks all.